As she landed on the other side, she felt a strange sense of exhilaration. For the first time, she was stepping into a world she had only ever dreamed of, a world where rules didn't matter, where she could be anyone she wanted to be. Little did she know, this decision would change her life forever. The chilly night air brushed against Chisimdi's face as she landed on the other side of the school fence. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest, both from the physical exertion and the realization of what she had just done. For the first time in her life, she had broken a rule, and not just any rule, but one of the cardinal ones at Anglican Girls' Oba. Not bad for a first-timer, Diana said with a grin as she adjusted her shimmering scarf. You might fit in after all. Chisimdi managed a small smile, though her nerves were still on edge. She glanced around, noting how different the world felt outside the protective walls of the school. The faint sounds of crickets filled the air, and the moonlight illuminated the narrow dirt road that stretched ahead. Come on, Faith said, beckoning her forward. We're just getting started. The queens led her down the road, their heels clicking against the gravel with practiced ease. Chisimdi struggled to keep up, the borrowed shoes pinching her feet. After a few minutes of walking, the faint glow of headlights appeared in the distance. A sleek black car pulled up beside them, its tinted windows gleaming under the moonlight. Right on time, Grace said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. The driver, a sharply dressed man in his mid-30s, stepped out and opened the doors for them. Faith slid into the passenger seat with the confidence of someone accustomed to luxury, while Diana, Grace, and Chisimdi piled into the back. The leather seats felt soft and cool beneath Chisimdi's fingertips, a stark contrast to the stiff wooden chairs she was used to at school. Where to, ladies? The driver asked, his tone respectful but warm. Paradise Lounge, Faith replied. We have a reservation. Chisimdi's stomach flipped. She had heard whispers about Paradise Lounge, a high-end nightclub on the outskirts of Oba. It was the kind of place that catered to the city's elite, where the music was loud, the drinks flowed freely, and the rules seemed to melt away. As the car sped through the quiet streets, the queens chatted animatedly about their plans for the night. Chisimdi stayed quiet, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She tried to process what she was doing, the enormity of her decision weighing heavily on her. You look nervous, Diana said, nudging her playfully. Relax. Tonight is all about having fun. Yeah, Grace added with a smirk. And if you play your cards right, you might even get a few gifts. Chisimdi forced a smile, though her unease only grew. She didn't want gifts or attention, she just wanted to prove, to herself, to the queens, to everyone, that she wasn't a nobody. The car pulled up to Paradise Lounge, and Chisimdi's breath caught in her throat. The building was a dazzling sight, its exterior illuminated by neon lights that pulsed in time with the thumping music inside. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the curb, flanked by velvet ropes and bouncers in tailored suits. As they stepped out of the car, all eyes seemed to turn toward the queens. Faith led the way, her head held high as if she owned the place. Grace and Diana followed, their every movement exuding confidence. Chisimdi trailed behind, feeling out of place in her borrowed clothes and pinched shoes. VIP section, Faith said coolly to one of the bouncers, handing him a sleek black card. He nodded and lifted the rope, allowing them to enter without so much as a glance at their IDs. Inside, the club was a sensory overload. The flashing lights, the pounding bass, the scent of expensive cologne mingling with the faint tang of alcohol, it was overwhelming. Chisimdi's eyes darted around, taking in the plush seating, the glittering chandeliers, and the sea of well-dressed patrons dancing or sipping colorful cocktails. This way, Diana said, grabbing her arm and leading her to a secluded area marked by frosted glass panels. A waiter appeared almost immediately, carrying a tray of drinks. To a fabulous night, Faith said, raising her glass. The others followed suit, and though Chisimdi hesitated, she eventually took a sip of the fruity drink placed in front of her. The sweetness masked the sharp burn of alcohol, a sensation she wasn't used to. So, Chisimdi, Grace began, leaning back against the cushioned bench. How does it feel to finally be part of something bigger? Chisimdi paused, unsure how to answer. It's different, she said honestly. Faith laughed. Don't be so stiff. You get used to it. Stick with us, and you'll never have to worry about being overlooked again. The night wore on, and the queens introduced Chisimdi to their world. She met men in tailored suits and flashy watches who spoke in smooth tones and handed out compliments like candy. One of them, a tall man named Ken, took a particular interest in her, showering her with praise and promising to take care of her. "You have a spark," he said, his voice low and charming. "I can tell you're not like the others." Chisimdi didn't know how to respond. Part of her was flattered, but another part of her felt uneasy. She kept remembering her mother's words, avoid distractions. Keep men at arm's length. As the night wore on, she felt herself loosening up. The queens taught her how to dance, their movements fluid and confident. They showed her how to hold a conversation without revealing too much and how to laugh in a way that seemed effortless. Chisimdi couldn't help but feel a small thrill at being included in their world, even if only for one night. By the time they left the club, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The queens were still buzzing with energy, laughing and recounting the highlights of the night. Chisimdi, however, felt a mix of exhaustion and guilt. As they approached the school fence, Fate turned to her with a smile. "So, what did you think?" "It was a lot," Chisimdi admitted. Grace laughed. "Welcome to the good life." They climbed back over the fence with the same practiced ease, sneaking into the dormitory just as the morning bell rang. Chisimdi slipped into her bed, her heart still racing. She knew she should feel guilty if she had broken the rules, lied to her teachers, and defied her parents' advice. But instead, all she could think about was the way the queens had made her feel important, valued, and alive. As she drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind: maybe this is just the beginning. The morning after her first night out with the queens, Chisimdi woke up to the sharp clang of the school bell. Her head throbbed, her body felt heavy, and her thoughts were a tangled mess of guilt and excitement. She barely managed to pull herself out of bed and get dressed before rushing to the assembly ground, her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Amoka was already seated in the courtyard, her arms crossed and her expression tense. She didn't say a word as Chisimdi slid into the seat beside her, but the silence spoke volumes. "You're late," Amoka finally muttered, her voice tight. "And you look like you didn't sleep all night." Chisimdi avoided her gaze. "I'm fine," she replied shortly, adjusting her tie. "Let's not make a big deal out of it." Amoka opened her mouth to respond, but the assembly began, cutting her off. As the headmistress addressed the student about upcoming exams and extracurricular activities, Chisimdi's mind wandered back to the events of the previous night. The music, the laughter, the compliments from strangers, it had been exhilarating, unlike anything she had ever experienced. For a few hours, she had felt important, like she truly belonged. But beneath the thrill lay a nagging sense of unease. Was she losing herself in the process of trying to fit in? Was she risking everything she had worked so hard for? Later that afternoon, as Chisimdi and Amoka made their way to the dining hall, the queens intercepted them near the library. Faith, Grace, and Diana were dressed in their usual stylish ensembles, their confident strides turning heads as they approached. "There she is!" Diana exclaimed, throwing an arm around Chisimdi's shoulder. "Our newest recruit." Amoka scowled. "Recruit for what?" "Oh, relax," Grace said dismissively. "We're just showing Chisimdi the finer things in life. Nothing you'd understand." Amoka clenched her fists, but Chisimdi quickly stepped between them. "Amoka, it's fine. Let's just go eat." Before Amoka could respond, Faith pulled a small, elegantly wrapped box from her bag and handed it to Chisimdi. "For you," she said with a sly smile. Chisimdi stared at the box, unsure of what to do. "What is this?" "Open it," Faith urged. Hesitantly, Chisimdi peeled back the wrapping to reveal a sleek, silver wristwatch. It sparkled under the sunlight, its face adorned with tiny crystals. She gasped, her eyes widening. This is too much," she stammered. "I can't accept this." "Nonsense," Diana said, waving her hand. consider it a welcome gift. Every member of our group deserves to look the part. Chisimdi glanced at Amoka, whose expression was a mix of anger and disappointment. It's not right, Amoka said quietly. You don't need their gifts. But the queens ignored her. Try it on, Grace insisted, taking the watch and slipping it onto Chisimdi's wrist. See. Perfect. The weight of the watch on her wrist felt both thrilling and unsettling. For a moment, Chisimdi imagined herself as one of them, confident, admired, untouchable. But Amoka's disapproving gaze pulled her back to reality. Thank you, Chisimdi said awkwardly, not wanting to offend the queens but also feeling conflicted about accepting the gift. Don't mention it, Fate said with a wink. You're one of us now? As the days passed, Chisimdi found herself spending more and more time with the queens. They introduced her to their world of luxury and privilege, showing her how to walk with confidence, speak with authority, and navigate social situations with ease. They also showered her with gifts to designer clothes, perfumes, even a sleek new smartphone. At first, Chisimdi resisted the attention, but it became harder to say no. The queens made her feel special in a way she had never experienced before. They treated her like an equal, something she had always longed for in the competitive, hierarchical world of Anglican girls Oba. But her new lifestyle came at a cost. Her once close friendship with Amoka began to deteriorate. The two girls barely spoke anymore, and when they did, their conversations were tense and filled with unspoken resentment. You're changing, Chisimdi, Amoka said one evening as they sat in their dorm room. And not for the better. Chisimdi sighed, her patience wearing thin. I'm just trying to enjoy myself, Amoka. Why can't you be happy for me? Because this isn't you, Amoka shot back. You're not like them, Chisimdi. You have something they don't, integrity. Don't throw it away just to fit in. Chisimdi didn't respond. Deep down, she knew Amoka was right, but she couldn't bring herself to walk away from the queens. They had given her a taste of a life she had only dreamed of, and she wasn't ready to let it go. One Saturday evening, the queens invited Chisimdi to another outing. This time, they promised it would be even better than the last. Chisimdi hesitated, remembering her mother's warning to avoid distractions, but the queen's persuasive words won her over. That night, as they climbed the school fence and slipped into the waiting car, Chisimdi felt a familiar rush of excitement. They drove to a private residence on the outskirts of town, a sprawling mansion surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The living room was filled with well-dressed men and women, their laughter and chatter echoing against the marble floors. A DJ played upbeat music, and waiters circulated with trays of exotic drinks and hors d'oeuvres. This is it, Diana whispered to Chisimdi, her eyes gleaming. The good life. Chisimdi tried to blend in, but her nerves were evident. She felt out of place among the confident, polished guests, her modest background a glaring contrast to their wealth and privilege. As the night wore on, one of the men approached her, a tall, handsome figure with a warm smile. You must be new, he said, his tone friendly but curious. I'm Ken. Chisimdi, she replied, shaking his hand nervously. Ken's smile widened. A beautiful name for a beautiful girl. His compliment flustered her, but she couldn't deny the thrill of his attention. The queens watched from across the room, nodding approvingly. You're doing great, Diana mouthed, raising her glass. By the end of the night, Ken handed Chisimdi a small envelope. For you, he said with a wink. Call me anytime. Inside the envelope was a wad of cash and a slip of paper with his phone number. Chisimdi stared at it in disbelief, her mind reeling. She had never held so much money in her life. Welcome to the club, Fate said as they left the mansion, her voice filled with pride. You've officially arrived. But as Chisimdi lay in bed that night, staring at the cash and the watch on her bedside table, a sense of unease crept over her. Was this really the life she wanted? Or was she losing herself in the process of trying to belong? The next morning, Chisimdi sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the envelope Ken had given her the night before. The cash inside was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her hands trembled as she held it, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. Across the room, Amoka was unpacking a small bag of books she had borrowed from the library. She glanced at Chisimdi and frowned. "What's that?" she asked, her tone sharper than usual. Chisimdi hesitated, then slipped the envelope into her bag. "Nothing important." Amoka raised an eyebrow. "Nothing important, or something you don't want me to know about?" "It's none of your business," Chisimdi snapped, her voice defensive. She immediately regretted her tone, but the damage was done. Amoka's expression hardened, and she turned back to her books without another word. The silence between them was suffocating, but Chisimdi couldn't bring herself to break it. She felt trapped between two worlds, one where she was respected and admired, and another where she had to face the harsh realities of her choices. The day dragged on. During classes, Chisimdi found it hard to concentrate. Her teachers noticed her distraction, but they didn't press her. Only Mrs. Necker, her literature teacher, pulled her aside after class. "Chisimdi," Mrs. Necker said gently, "you've been one of my brightest students since you joined this school. But lately, you seem different. Is everything all right?" Chisimdi forced a smile. "I'm fine, Ma. Just tired." Mrs. Necker studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If you ever need someone to talk to, my door is always open." "Thank you, Ma," Chisimdi replied, though she knew she wouldn't take the offer. How could she explain everything without revealing the truth about her secret life with the queens? That evening, Chisimdi sat in the dormitory, staring at her unopened textbooks. The queens were gathered in their corner, laughing and chatting as they sorted through a pile of shopping bags filled with designer clothes and accessories. "Chisimdi," Diana called, waving her over. "Come join us." Chisimdi hesitated but eventually walked over, leaving her books behind. She felt a pang of guilt as she passed Amoka, who didn't even look up. "You need to update your wardrobe," Grace said as she held up a sleek, sequined dress. "This would look amazing on you." "I can't afford that," Chisimdi said, shaking her head. Faith rolled her eyes. "Who said anything about paying? Take it. Consider it a gift." Chisimdi hesitated, but Diana shoved the dress into her hands. "Come on, don't be shy. You're one of us now." The girls laughed, and for a moment, Chisimdi felt a flicker of belonging. But as she returned to her corner with the dress in hand, Amoka finally spoke. "So this is who you are now?" Amoka asked, her voice low but filled with disappointment. "Taking handouts from them and pretending it doesn't cost you anything." Chisimdi turned to her, her frustration boiling over. "Why can't you just be happy for me? For once in my life, I'm not the poor girl everyone looks down on. I'm part of something bigger." "Bigger?" Amoka snapped, standing up. "You're being used, Chisimdi. They don't care about you. They're just playing a game, and you're the pawn." The words stung, but Chisimdi refused to let them sink in. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "You've never been in my shoes." Amoka shook her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "You're right. I don't understand how you can throw away everything you've worked for just to impress a bunch of spoiled girls." Without another word, Amoka grabbed her books and left the room, leaving Chisimdi alone with her thoughts. As the weeks passed, Chisimdi continued to immerse herself in the queen's world. They took her to lavish parties, introduced her to wealthy men, and showered her with gifts. She began to adopt their mannerisms, learning to walk, talk, and act like one of them. But despite the glitz and glamour, a sense of unease lingered. Chisimdi often found herself lying awake at night, questioning her choices. She missed the simplicity of her life before the queens, the quiet moments she used to share with Amoka, and the pride she felt in her academic achievements.